Well, thank you everybody for joining today's webinar. I just want to start off by saying that this webinar is going to be recorded, and we hope that we can circulate this afterwards to those who were not able to attend and share this information. So today's webinar is titled, How Can Pro-Poor Enterprises and Small-Scale Renewable Energy Technologies Become More Integrated into the Cambodian Economy? My name is Ryan Katawaki, and I am a Communications Officer with Nexus, and I will be hosting today's webinar. So before I proceed with my introduction, I'd like to point out a few details about our webinar platform today, Skype for Business. So as we have a number of people participating from around the world, microphones have been muted for this call, except for the presenters, because we want to try to maintain audio quality throughout the call. We would encourage you to ask questions through the instant messenger function, and you can access this by clicking on the small quotation bubble icon that appears in the menu, and this will display a normal looking chat function. So please submit your questions throughout the presentation, and following our presentation we will have a question and answer period to address these. And also please let me know either through the chat function or via email if you're having any technical difficulties, and I'll do my best to assist you with that. So today's webinar is being hosted by Nexus and features the research of one of our member organizations, the Small Scale Sustainable Infrastructure Development Fund, or S3IDF. I will begin by quickly introducing Nexus for those of you who are not familiar with us. We are a cooperative, not-for-profit organization with 23 members, and our work focuses on supporting vulnerable communities by scaling up successful projects. Our office is located in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and we have been operating since 2009. I will now introduce our presenting organization, S3IDF. They are an international development organization that promotes inclusive market and financial systems by addressing barriers and gaps that prevent poor and underserved populations from fully participating in the mainstream economy. They have offices in both the United States and India. Today's webinar will present the findings from S3IDF's recent study, the Social Merchant Bank Approach, Opportunities for Dissemination to Cambodia. This research was made possible in part through Nexus's Grants for Innovation program. This program supports innovative approaches to climate change mitigation and poverty alleviation that have the potential to achieve large-scale dissemination. I will now introduce our speaker today, Dr. Russell DeLucia, the President and Executive Director of S3IDF US. Trained in engineering and economics with a PhD from Harvard University, Dr. DeLucia is a pioneer in the field of development finance and infrastructure development, with experience in more than 60 countries, covering every geographic area of the world. Prior to creating S3IDF, he was a consultant for bilateral and multilateral development finance institutions such as ADB, IBRD, IDB, IFAD, and IFC. Dr. DeLucia has written and presented extensively on infrastructure, financing, environment, and development issues, and in recent years been a regularly invited presenter at the sessions on financing energy access at the Asian Clean Energy Forum held at the Asian Development Bank. Thank you very much for speaking with us today, Dr. DeLucia, and I will now turn the microphone over to you.
Brian, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you all for joining this webinar. I'm going to get to it, okay, since we have limited amounts of time, and I hope you all are able to see the slides in the background, okay. The presentation is organized, okay, in 5 different parts. There'll be a quick overview about beyond what Ryan has mentioned about S3IDF, and a little talk on the study process, and in particular the Social Merchant Bank approach, and then focus in particular, okay, on the findings of the study, okay, and then pointing the way towards an application which we hope will happen, okay, in actual implementation in Cambodia. As Ryan said very quickly, okay, something about our mission, okay, S3IDF's Social Merchant Bank, okay, approach, okay, is designed to connect basically members and connect and strengthen people in the ecosystem, okay, of entrepreneurs, financial institutions, technology suppliers, and others, okay, to be able to promote, okay, greater integration for poor households and communities into the mainstream economy through market-based mechanisms. The SMBA was designed to be very, very widely applicable allowing tailoring, okay, to local conditions, and market that allow the market to enable the poor to have access to basic services, employment, and asset ownership. And I'll be touching on the asset ownership many times throughout this presentation, because unlike a lot of other pro-poor activities done around the world, okay, we focus very strongly on the issue of not just employment and increased income, but also the issue of asset ownership. Our work falls into three main areas, okay? One is supporting entrepreneurs by helping them to create and access effective business plans, access technology and equipment for their enterprises, and secure financing to allow them to operate and grow. In some cases, create, operate, and grow their businesses. Then developing market linkages, okay, by strengthening the value chain and working with various market players. And that's very important in the sense, okay, all of these players that are part of the ecosystem, okay, suppliers of enterprises, developing the linkages with, and often helping them to remove barriers, okay, to business transactions. Aside from those focused on the ecosystem itself, okay, around entrepreneurs, okay, we have in our mission, okay, spreading the approach by building the capacity of other groups and institutions to incorporate the social merchant bank approach in their work, okay, and in their programs and projects, okay, and then ultimately affecting a broader impact, because that's where we are now, okay. This is one of those exercises to try and get the social merchant bank approach applied in Cambodia by others, okay, with or without, okay, our assistance. Now, when we come to the study itself, okay, the study was involved three phases. One is an assessment of the challenges and opportunity of applying the social merchant bank approach and I will probably start saying SMBA instead of the full social merchant bank approach. Determine the interest in and support for an SMBA application among communities, among Cambodia's communities in the financial sector and the development community, and of course, entrepreneur community itself, okay? And then evaluation of an overall potential of the SMBA in Cambodia. We investigated the presence of legal and regulatory conditions that would allow or constrain, okay, the SMBA application, okay? And then we looked in particular at the market relevance of selected technologies and key providers and their distribution. Regarding the relevance, this focus was mostly on renewable energy space and renewable energy technology, because that was basically the scope. It's both what Nexus focuses on and therefore in our scope for the work, okay? But when the SMBA is applied, okay, in other areas and other programs, it can look very much, okay, together. So the study included desk work, field work with interviews, okay, and meetings, and a workshop with a range of public and private players. Continuing, I'm now at the key characteristics of the social merchant bank approach, which is geared, okay, basically to providing a bundled support, okay, of integrated business development, technical, and financial support. Particular to this is leveraging the co-financing so that we can draw on a revolving fund created to implement the SMBA, okay, and that provides a menu of gap-filling finance so others will come in and support the same investment deals, okay, in one way or the other. And that menu has to include almost any, and does include almost any form of financing, okay, that is relevant. Debt, equity, partial risk guarantees, okay. And to allow in this process, okay, that technical innovations, okay, can be made available to low-income players, okay, so that they can adopt off-the-shelf technology and uses the evolution of technology and materials, okay. You all know about photovoltaics, okay, which has been one of the things that's evolved dramatically in the last couple of generations. But think also about plastic pipe that allows you, okay, a Sherpa or and a worker to take penstock for small hydro up into the hills easily, as opposed to what your father or grandfather had to do with steel pipe, okay? And it works, it's designed to work all the way across the value chain, from the upstream suppliers of know-how and technology down to the delivery out to the ultimate customer, okay? And as needed, it includes the incubation of enterprising and entrepreneurs, so that one can take, okay, lessons learned elsewhere to strengthen these players, okay, and facilitate partnerships between the entrepreneurs with financial institutions and others to foster livelihood improvements, okay? Now, that means we don't worry just about the supply of energy. We in particular worry about, okay, the livelihood enhancing kind of investments such as irrigation, pumping, or dry or cold storage, and all of which are energy dependent. And then therefore you draw to use a civil engineering phrase, you draw your free body cut, okay, around both the supply side and the demand side, okay? And in the overall dimension, okay, the SMBA has been created to be a win-win in its transaction, okay? So that donors, technology and suppliers, beneficiaries, and local financial institutions all benefit from its application. And therefore, okay, once exposed to its concepts and ideas, are interested in hopefully supporting it and implementing it. Now, moving on and not commenting about the photos, because my colleagues tell me I have a tendency to go on and on about the photos, and therefore, okay, eat up all the time that I'm supposed to be talking substantively about. But you do notice that the photos are pretty, okay, and they're real and they're Cambodian. So when you look for the potential of the application, okay, it should increase market penetration of small-scale renewable energy investments and financial structures to benefit the poor and underserved communities. However, the reality is, okay, is there are aspects of the Cambodian energy, financial, and development sectors that affect how the SMBA can be applied, okay? And it's clear, okay, that there are opportunities that exist through public and private players that have roles and activities that are already supportive of some aspects of the SMBA and of the leveraged co-financing and related deal structuring, the two things that are very critical of this approach, okay? And the deal structuring, if we have time, and I'll bring up, includes deal structuring in a way that when the debt, okay, is paid off, poor communities and poor households and others end up owning part of the assets, okay, if not all of them, okay, rather than just other players who are outside of the board. And it includes, the application can include developing a new portfolio of investments for selected partners, okay, or whose scope and geographical coverage is limited, or it can be built on opportunities through existing development programs of larger actors who have a wider geographical focus, okay, and sectoral focus. Now, again, talking now a little bit about the focus on technologies and investment classes, and again, not saying anything about the pictures. You won't notice how difficult it is for me to not do that, okay. If you can conceive a focus on difficult to service areas in Cambodia, that's where the greatest impact is going to come from applying the social merchant bank approach, okay? And in this study, the technologies that we focused on, the priority technologies that we focused on, were biomass gasification, solar photovoltaic applications, certain biodigestion applications, and certain small-scale hydropower. With focus particularly, okay, on those, because they have not had a lot of focus and attention and market studies, okay, done before, okay, and that that's not to imply that the social merchant bank approach is only applicable to these, because in other areas, okay, you can focus, you would be applying this for any other kinds of infrastructure services that are needed, okay, for livelihood improvement. That means potable water, sanitation, and in our work elsewhere is being done on those other infrastructure areas. And the range of investments that you are then looking at when you think both about the demand side, okay, and the supply side, okay, is really enormous, okay, from a few $100s, okay, to many tens of thousands of dollars, okay. But that's all still very small when we say small scale infrastructure relative to big dams or others, generation facilities. But it does have a very significant range, and that's very relevant. To thinking about the financial institutions that can be of help in there. Because some financial institutions, the range of their investment focus and capacity. Is not in that whole range. Again, a critical issue here, is the financial institutions. The whole sector, in Cambodia has, some characteristics that are important to note. One is that there's really limited financing products, options available. Yes, there's deposits and loans are the primary financial products offered. There's very few non-financial institution or non-FI bank, non-FI operators, operating there. For example, leasing companies, impact investor, venture capitalists, and those players who are working with crowdfunding. That's not to say there's none of them. But they're not the many banks and microfinance institutions that are there, for which I'll mention stuff. But for all of them, one of the problems, is the risk aversion that you find in financial institutions everywhere, but particularly banks and others, and the lack of wholesale financing so that you can get larger players, with access to money supply, passing it on to others that are further down the supply chain. And in Cambodia, it turns out that you have not just a lack of affordable financing, but lack of sometimes what we call the footprint. So the availability of finance, particularly that exists at all, is mostly from microfinance institutions. It's expensive, and its terms are too short to address some of the things that are needed for the kind of investments we're after. You basically can't pay back a gasifier and make it viable. With 18 months to 2 years of financing. And unfortunately, the banks, are, let's just say they're not what they ought to be, and they're not serving the role that they need to in the development space of this country. Now you can say partially because that's their collateral requirements, and the mismatch between loan tenure and size and the requirements of small and medium enterprises that tends to be associated with the supply of these technologies and their use, whether it's in irrigation or some other livelihood kind of stuff. But comparing to what could be done with these kinds of financial institutions now, there's another perspective you can take on what I've just outlined about this to look at all these same shortcomings. One is, that the fundamental problem is an access and supply availability. There's just not enough development, philanthropic, and commercial capital, in Cambodia to address these problems, Of course, and as mentioned already, the footprint of them, if you had a map up on the wall, and you put pins all over Cambodia, where there's if you had a big map, you would see there's an awful lot of pins, but they tend to be only in a few places, and there's lots of places, and you had just for simplicity, two types of pins: microfinance institution and a branch bank or bank. And think of them yellow for the bank, and red for the microfinance institution. There'd be quite a few reds, but not everywhere, and just a few yellows, almost nowhere, And none of those players are offering the product, the financial product, of loans of the right tenor, cost, and not to mention access to equity and other kind of financing. And when you look at those players, what you find is a dramatic difference in performance just using two simple metrics. One is, if you would, the number of customers that they're serving, and the other is the return on equity that they're getting from their deal making. And you find that by and large the microfinance institutions are doing a better job than the banks in both vectors. And in the microfinance space, there's a much wider range in performance characteristics. there's a small number, a handful, not small, I mean, that's still small, but okay, a handful of microfinance institutions that really dominate the space in terms of both the number of beneficiaries they're serving, okay, and their return on equity. But the problem is, remember I say, okay, their terms are not well developed, and there's significant relative shortcomings in other behavior, and the regulators are not doing the job they could do, okay, by taking both these microfinance institutions and the banks, okay, and making them behave in a certain way that would serve the development of the sector and in the broader development in general. When you compare what has been done, not okay, just in their neighboring countries, in the Asian community and elsewhere. So there's a big role, okay, potential for what I call regulator activism, okay, to change the behavior of these players, okay. Remember, I'm talking about players that need a license to operate in this country, okay. Okay, next slide, okay. Again, okay, we'll talk in general, okay, just cut it up into two sectors. One is the energy sector now and the development sector, since I've now hammered a bit on the financial sector. That's not to say the financial sector is not doing a good job in some places and doing some stuff, but they got to do much, much more, okay, if Cambodia is, not just for energy and the stuff that we're talking about, if Cambodia is going to be able to grow in the way that it has a potential given its human and natural resource endowment, okay. Now, with respect to energy, okay, and since our focus is on the renewable energy space, in a particular part of it, the reality is that in most cases, okay, the renewable energy space is really still in the development phase. Despite the rhetoric of the government, okay, and despite, okay, other stuff, its current role in serving the needs of the energy is really quite minimal, okay, and there's been very limited access, okay, market characteristics and renewable energy potential, okay. There's been some work on it and what have you. There's been more work done on one big damn study, okay, than practically all the stuff done on small distributed options, okay. Now, in the development sector, okay, there needs to be much, much more attention, okay, to what they can do and get over some of the problems that they don't do, which is really think about the intermediation, okay, of their money down to the ultimate beneficiaries, okay, and then using that intermediation much more of the private sector as opposed to the public sector. In a way that the private sector, okay, whether they be, microfinance institutions getting wholesale finance from banks or from international development institutions in a series of intermediation, but where there's players that are involved and have skin in the game. And get over the silo problems that exist, okay, in so many development finance institutions and organizations, that the reality is that they tend to have the people who worry about the supply side, okay, are not ones who also worry about how you're going to do the livelihood investments with them, okay, and so if you don't do that kind of coordination and think about how to do investments that deal with both of those, okay, you basically just are not getting the bang for the buck that you need, okay, and this silo effect and silent problem is not unique to Cambodia. Boy, is it not unique to Cambodia, okay? And they need to be able to do, okay, how to use blended capital structures, okay, of grant, okay, and non-grant monies, okay, and to put that together in a way that facilitates not just local finance, but I mean international finance or large, but local finance too. So just remember that when you think about these sectors, one other point, okay, this lack of donor, okay, activists in trying to do some of this kind of collaboration and breaking the silo. We've talked about renewable energy, okay, but at least there's something happening. There's almost nothing happening in the energy efficiency space, okay, where there is lots of low-hanging fruit that could be captured with good deals, okay. We think, okay, that this study suggests that you could have applications, okay, and it's clear it will involve, okay, a series of stages. In that assessment, okay, of investment pipeline and feasibilities, developing the partnership agreements to bring these things to fruition, okay, obviously securing funding, okay, to make those partnerships happen, okay, and then building an pilot investment portfolio that integrates the social merchant bank approach structures in going forward, okay. And each one of those stages I just mentioned, okay, is going to have some multiple activities, okay, some of which, okay, could be separately financed, because you got to get going with what we might call the front end stuff, okay. So you're doing the feasibility stuff, okay. Now, when you think about trying to go to this implication and application, okay, of this SMBA, I want to repeat and go back to some aspects of the SMBA that's really critical, and it's not just actually SMBA, anything that's really pro-poor, okay, and financing and structuring Medicus. We have to face the reality, okay, that end user and small enterprise, or end user being communities or households, have to overcome first cost capital, technology, and cost barriers. Just like everywhere in the world, okay, and that includes actually aspects of the developed economy. So poor people can't afford to pay cash for technologies, okay, and non-poor people can't even, okay. So you can't have someone whose income is only in the hundreds of dollars paying some hundreds of dollars, okay, for a solar home system on a cash basis, okay, and that's not, and even if they have some more of that, they're going to be okay, limited, okay, and to overcome that. So they've got to have financing, okay. And to do this work in the stages I just outlined, okay, you need development and philanthropic capital. Primarily, even if the deals, and they should be designed under the SMBA, that they will be financially viable with the appropriate financing going forward from the point of view which you've figured out what to do. But the front end work, the studies, the preparation, and whatever, usually has to be done, okay, with soft costs, donor and philanthropic capital. Remember what I said earlier, okay? There's been very limited studies on these. We're not talking about situations where there's a cookie cutter model, okay, and you can come in and do for investment N what's been done for 17 before that, okay. In most cases, there's been 1 to 5, okay. Not if you look at some other neighboring countries where the numbers of those investments that are similar to this are in the many hundreds already, okay. And the leveraging of local finance is absolutely critical, because there is simply not enough money, either government money or international donor money, whether that's for soft money and philanthropic sources, okay, or international donors, okay. So what you need is mechanisms for investment structure that deal with, that are pro-poor and risk mitigation. In general, that's going to be what things I mentioned earlier, which is the gap-filling finance, okay, for the enterprise, but also guarantees and other credit conditioning for the financial institutions. And if you have strong suppliers of equipment, they could provide equipment supplier financing. And most importantly, in the broader sense, okay, to really impact the poor, okay, is to structure the deals such that after the deals are financed and they've gotten to paid off, in the end, poor communities end up owning these assets. Look around the developing world. Look around typical deals that have helped poor people with their livelihoods. Very often, somebody else ends up owning those assets. They may get to benefit from it, okay, but not nearly as much as they could do with ownership, okay. So that allows me to segue right into one of my next points, okay. Investing for impact on the poor, okay, is not the same, okay, as impact investing as many define it, okay, because too much assistance, okay, on that, okay, has focused on without having the well-designed implementation and intermediation so that it's actually really helping the poor. And it may not, because of the mix and blend that you need, as I mentioned before, of both soft money and what I'm going to call hard money, okay, which is the money that comes here from the microfinance institution, is very hard, okay, that there's not enough, okay, focus on such that the poor really benefit. And you can't make the kind of commercial returns that is often thought about when we see people, so-called impact investors. I'm not saying no role for them, but they can't be the primary role, okay? And that means you've got to have very careful work on the intermediation between the source of the money and the ultimate needs to change the ecosystem that I talked about before, and that has to be able to deliver not just money, but the technical assistance and capacity building so that the bundle of business development services, access to the technology, and financing can be delivered collectively. I like to say that applying the SMBA approach, okay, that its innovation is in the delivery of this bundled services, okay? And what you should be doing, okay, is invest so the poor's livelihoods and incomes improve, but critically think about ways to structure deals so the asset ownership, okay? And that none of that, both the livelihoods and the asset ownership can't happen without access to infrastructure services. But the deal structuring on this stuff is very important. So if you're underwriting with development and philanthropic capital, the development of this, it ought to damn well be the poor people and the poor communities that end up benefiting the most by that in terms of asset ownership, as opposed to just more commercial players who are not necessarily coming from, okay, the poor segments, okay. But that takes more work, more preparation, okay, and more deal structure, and that unfortunately is not done enough. But it's done if you make of the application of the social merchant bank approach, okay. And if you think about this and you look at what the poor can do, what you find, okay, is that very often that they have some own basic entrepreneurial skills, okay, that if they can be built in, okay, they can be very important contributors to this changing of the ecosystem in general, okay, strengthen them to be able to take advantage, okay, of this ecosystem that you're building, okay. Now, we think that in Cambodia, okay, like other places, okay, the social merchant bank approach can be applied, okay, across various geographies, sectors, and with particular focus. For example, okay, if you had Women's World Banking coming into Cambodia and saying, you know, I only want to do deals and help, okay, stuff where the women entrepreneurs are helped, okay, you can design that. Something else, or somebody only wants to do certain provinces of parts of Cambodia. The reality is that the social merchant bank approach can be applied, okay, with various geographies or sectors or focus, okay, and you end up, okay, it's not that there has a lot of economies of scale captured in applying it. There are certain economies of scope in the sense that you create a fund structure, okay, to deliver collectively technology development, bundling of assistance and fund financing, and you design windows to deliver different kinds of financing to support the pre-investment work, okay, and then from post-financial closure, the investment implementation, and then going forward into operation, okay. And if I had the time, okay, this webinar would go for 2 hours, maybe 3, okay, and I would talk to you about how that fund structure could and should operate. And if you read the report that backs up some of this, okay, that stuff is in there, okay. Now, you then think about this being applied, okay, in principle in Cambodia, for sure, at 2 different scales, if you would, okay. One is building a portfolio with selected existing project partners who then can be involved in the next step, okay, of a selected number of target deals, okay, preparing them, and then something that's much larger, a pilot program, okay, framed in a larger programmatic initiative. And I'll mention, in Cambodia, okay, it is clear to us, okay, that there's, okay, examples of possible doing that, of applications of that at both this, what I'm going to call more limited scale and scope, with players that exist in their programmatic effort, and at least one very large, if you want to say, all India. I mean, all India. I was working on India last night, okay, and wouldn't you know, okay, that I mentioned, okay, India instead of Cambodia, okay, but if you go back 2 days ago, I would have mentioned Myanmar instead of Cambodia, and a week ago, it probably would have been Haiti, excuse me, okay. Coming to looking at detail in Cambodia, if you look at the French NGO, I can't say it in French, I'm sorry, okay. It's basically the agronomists and veterinarians without borders, okay? And their program work that they're doing, okay, in Cambodia, okay? If you focus and apply the SMBA approach with them, okay, and where they have existing donor relationships and existing experience delivering, okay, services to poor people and communities, okay, and they apply the SMBA approach, they could get a lot more bang for their buck, okay? And I'll mention just a couple of others, okay? One is the Cambodian Rural Development Team, as well as the Oxfam team. And then on the big picture, all India scope, okay? There's a new initiative being done by one of the carbon trust funds, okay, being administered by the Asian Development Bank, okay, that's in its early stage. It's calling Scaling Up Renewable Energy in Application in Cambodia for the Scaling Up in Low-Income Countries program, okay? And it's got enormous potential to apply the SMBA approach. Unfortunately, the way that program is designed, okay, it doesn't have enough TA. It's got basically financial support in it. But if it could go across the street, okay, and have a nice collaboration, which we think is one of the things, the shortcomings of the donors, with the Australians, okay, the Australians have a program that focuses on certain particular areas, okay, that overlap with what the SERP program does. And all they deliver with their program, or are designed to deliver, is technical assistance. And one of the things about applying the social merchant bank approach is you create a structure where you can get this kind of synergy from two different donors coming into the same fund or facility, okay, and their resources being used, okay, to get this. So if you look at the potential, okay, and I'll talk about these two different kinds of cases, okay, and you can find a way to build on what exists, okay, both at the limited scale, either geographically or sectorally, okay, as well as at least one of the All Cambodia initiatives. It's clear you could find, okay, a way to show the way, okay, to get the SMBA approach applied in Cambodia. And we hope that results. We have ideas about trying to help them chase that, or, okay, and if possible, we would be glad to help transfer the skills and experience from elsewhere we have. Because the reality is that if you don't take the innovative, okay, pro-poor kinds of approaches of the SMBA, and you don't leverage the capacity of other donor monies, okay, and philanthropic monies, to get the local capital markets to support these kinds of things. And not just, this is focused on certain parts of renewable energy, but it's just the same thing on a lot of other areas, okay, on water supply and other kinds of assets that are absolutely needed to solve the poor, okay? And if you don't, okay, Cambodia's going to continue to grow, okay? It's going to do okay, probably, okay? I think, well, because it's got these enormous human, okay, and natural resources, but nowhere near what it needs to, okay, or could. And as a consequence, the poor in Cambodia are not being served well by the development, okay, and energy sector players, okay, by not looking at more innovation, aspects of innovation that take into account aspects of the social merchant bank approach. Not necessarily, okay, every detail. As I said earlier in our presentation, you can adjust the approach, okay, to fit the local conditions. And that means local conditions for what a player who's only dealing with part of the things, as I mentioned, okay, for the Cambodian Rural Development Team, or in an all Cambodia effort, okay, such as going to be happen under this climate fund initiative. Okay, I'm wrapping up now. I thank you for your time, okay, and most importantly for your patience, okay, and please ask me a question about at least one of the pictures, okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. DeLucia, for that presentation. You've given us a good overview of the challenges and the opportunities of applying the social merchant bank approach in Cambodia. We've got just under 20 minutes remaining in our time today, and I'm going to give the audience an opportunity to type up their questions. If you just click on that quote bubble icon that appears in your menu, it'll open up a chat window, and if you can type in your questions there, I will read them out loud, and Dr. DeLucia can address them. So just as I give folks an opportunity to do that, I'll lead off with a question, Dr. DeLucia. You mentioned that financial systems and renewable energy ambition were challenges in Cambodia, and I imagine other developing countries as well. So I was just curious in your research if you know of other developing countries where conditions might be more optimal that Cambodia could look to for some reforms or some guidance that might increase their potential for having the SMBA applied in the country.
Well, first it could start looking at its neighbors, okay? I guess it's the year before last, okay? There's been some all ASEAN studies on some of the stuff. So, if you look in Thailand, for example, okay, while Thailand doesn't use the SMBA explicitly, okay, there are a lot of innovative programs that are being done by players, both on the practitioners and the banking and the government side, with respect to special innovations and incentives. And of course, the banking and microfinance players have a much greater footprint. The first thing is, of course, the greater footprints, okay, of the institutions. So Cambodia is it's not the only one that's in the world that's relatively, to go back to my analogy, okay, there's not a lot of pins all over the map, okay, the way there is, okay, in some countries, such as India, okay, but there's also not, okay, the activism of the regulators, okay. Now, that's a very important thing, okay, government and the regulators, okay. If you look, for example, at the incentive programs that there's an incentive program in Thailand that takes a cess that's put on petroleum, and it creates a fund that basically you can come and apply for pre-investment work, okay, with soft money that's very often needed for renewable energy. So that is a structure that provides that money, okay, for deals that we would like to see get done, okay. It's not necessarily depending on who's going to put the deal together. It might not necessarily be pro-poor, but it certainly be renewable energy, and it will address the pre-investment program that your problems that you have, okay. There's lots of menus, okay, of innovation, okay, that has been done, okay. There's actually there's an All Asia initiative that has looked at some of these things, okay. And of course, in the case of where we're applying it, and also looked at what we did in Nepal, a very key issue about this is activist regulators in terms of what the banks have to do, okay, and activist international donors, okay, so that they force intermediation to happen in a better way. That's now for the very first time happening in this area, with the French donor, okay, and the Foreign Trade Bank to be the intermediary, okay. But Foreign Trade Bank is yet to have any of its own skin in the game, but at least it's going to learn how to do this stuff, okay. If you walk across the ASEAN community, okay, whether it's Indonesia, okay, or Laos, okay, Vietnam, okay, many of the donors, okay, international donors, already have learned how to do good intermediation with private players to deliver, okay, these services that are needed, okay, and very often targeting poor communities, okay. So there's pieces of the innovations that are needed, okay, and there are pieces of this, okay. When I say pieces, I mean in terms of players, whether they be on the regulatory or government side, or in Cambodia, that would allow this development to happen, okay? And we, in the course of this presentation and our study, we see the opportunity for those players, okay? But I want to come back to something, okay? There's nothing, our view of the social merchant bank approach is the following, okay? Its uniqueness is in the, okay, very explicit pro-poor lens of its approach, okay, and the bundling, okay, of the delivery, okay, of services and approaches, okay, and it is not rocket science, but it is hard work, and as a consequence, very often interventions that are made either by government or donors, okay, end up, okay, helping, but not helping enough of the poor, and not helping them the way they could happen. And that's one of the reasons, okay, why, okay, not enough progress is being made, okay. But there are examples, okay, that can be pulled and shown. I'm sorry, I've taken too much time with this question, so I hope there's some more, okay. But please, what about the pictures? I mean, the pictures.
No, that's fine. Thanks for putting it into the context of the broader region there. Actually, I haven't received any questions from the audience, but I would like to go back to the pictures here, because I know you spent a couple of months at the start of 2015 gathering your research for the study. So I was wondering if you had any stories or just comments you'd like to make about any of the visuals that you had in the presentation. And if you'd like to comment on them, please scroll back so that the audience can see the visual.
Go back to the very first slide, okay, the opening slide, okay? And I'm gonna, that's gonna allow me to deal both with a specific, okay, and a generalism, okay? That's a salt pond operation, okay? That's, you can find anywhere, okay, in South and Southeast Asia, or almost anywhere in the world, okay, where the country has a border, okay, with the sea. Salt is a necessary, next to water, and a few other things that we really need. Everybody needs salt to survive, okay? The technology to do salt, okay, falls in a few different categories, but the one that is the most common everywhere in the world, okay, with various degrees of mechanization or increased technology or whatever, is to use the natural resource of seawater and the sun, okay, to allow evaporation, okay? Now this is a picture of salt pond operators, okay, in Cambodia, okay? I know from our work that we're doing elsewhere, at least in 2 other countries, that we're working on trying to improve the technology and productivity of these low-income people, okay? One in India and one in Myanmar, okay? Everywhere in the ASEAN community, you will find salt ponds, okay, of one type or another, mostly poor communities, mostly ones that could have some applications to do of investment, okay, to do a more productive job, whether it's putting plastic in the bottom of a pond, so when you're scraping up the salt, okay, you get a better quality, okay, for doing, when you've got to do the storage, okay, and being able to get the drying to work better, okay, and then the bulk shipping where you have to have investments, okay, in transport, or organizing a cooperative of lots of these, basically both poor, in most cases, poor workers, and in many cases, poor, relatively poor communities that own the salt ponds, okay? Now, and I say, okay, so that's taking the natural resources, using the sun, but also effectively in some places, you can do the pumping or the lifting, okay, with wind or with solar and others, okay? If there's access, okay, to other kinds of technology nearby, okay, you may be doing that, okay, with some biomass for solar or drying or something else like that. And you will find applications like that everywhere, okay, in as I say, everywhere that's got access to the sea. Where or where not, there has been applications of innovative financing and trying to help those poor people, whether that's in organizational, bringing them better technology, bringing them financing. It's part of the reason we lead with that picture, okay? Because it is so, that issue of salt, along with water, okay, that are clearly not necessary, okay, for livelihood, okay, is so necessary and why we use it. Okay, now, if you want me to go pick one of the other pictures, okay?
Actually, Dr. Delucia, we do have a question from the audience here. Thanks very much for that explanation, though. So we've got about 5 more minutes to address this question. It came in from Timol, and they ask, will this approach to help the pro-poor enterprise in Cambodia to access investment funds at a lower financial cost than is currently being charged by banks or MFIs in Cambodia, and how?
Get the activist regulators to tell the banks to do their job, that they have a license, they're getting very low return on their equity. And then one of the things that they should be providing, okay, is wholesale financing to the microfinance institutions. And the microfinance institutions should be able to put together, okay, structures that allow for longer finance at less than anywhere from 16 to 24% a year, okay? Okay, where you can borrow bank money, okay, for like 8%, okay, with collaterals in Cambodia, and those banks should be required, okay, to target a certain amount of their lending to certain sectors, not just for renewable energy, okay, but for other things that are pro-development, okay? And they should be providing wholesale finance. The microfinance institutions are relying largely on either international donor money or charity money, or they have to try and charge in really quite high rates, so they make very high returns on equity, many of them well into the double digits, okay? And they're doing that, and they make the money, and they therefore can have organic growth to grow their capital, okay? Can that be done? Yes. Can you find, you can look in a country as poor as Nepal, okay, where the regulators are saying if you're in a commercial bank, okay, there's certain things you have to do, okay, to try and push the development agenda of this country. And one of those things, okay, are certain kinds of lending that you have to do, which is on wholesale lending. And I can mention other situations too. Probably the most important issues of addressing these kinds of things is to get institutional change, okay, by both the activists and the government and the donor community, okay. And there's enough practitioners in this country and others that will join that will be able to adapt to those changes, okay. But getting those big boys to do what they should do is very often, okay, a tough road to hoe, okay, because it's not that they don't know that they should do some of this stuff.
We're just going to wrap up now. I'd like to thank Dr. DeLucia for presenting on the S3IDF's research, and I'd also like to extend a thank you to Elizabeth Friend at S3IDF for helping me coordinate the webinar. And I'd particularly like to thank all of you who joined us for today's presentation. We've recorded this through Skype, and we'll be circulating a link to the video at a later date that can be passed on to anybody who might benefit from this information. And Nexus hopes to host more webinars in the future to help profile the important work that our members are doing. And we hope you'll join us again at a later date. So thank you again to S3IDF, and everybody have a great day.